Hi, everyone. You should all be extremely proud of yourselves for making it to the midpoint of this course. You are all doing excellent work and engaging each other on the discussion board. And I wanted to say thank you to all of you who posted that you had served as first responders during the pandemic. I can definitely understand why you would be looking to make a career change at this point. Also, at this point, you have submitted or are in the process of submitting your first major assignment for this course, which is due tonight. And I want to say kudos to you on that as well. I'm looking forward to seeing what insights you have gained in your comparisons. And please let me know if you have any technological issues, etc., as I am learning that Blackboard can be a little bit finicky. I will work to get the papers graded as quickly as possible, so please keep an eye out for your updated grades and email me should you have any questions or concerns. So let's take a look now at the topics, resources, and discussion post prompts for this week. This week will be all about public library funding in the context of library advocacy. Definitely check out the lecture notes in the weekly module written by a past instructor just to get a good summary of library funding structure and schemes. You'll also be reviewing several readings that will give you both a sense of the history of library funding in the US and a look at the landscape of current funding. What's important for you to know is that generally public libraries receive their funding at the local level and at the state level. State provided funding and federal funding can vary and be very specific to library locations depending on the system. For example, at Queens Public Library, the majority of the state funding went only to the central library and cannot be used at any of the branches. Similarly, at Enoch Pratt, since the Central Library is also known as the state, or also designated as the State Library Resource Center, the state funds not only go to programming and collection development, but also to a percentage of staff salaries. So that means that local issues and events will impact your library's operations and services significantly. The Stricter article from 2011 does a great job of explaining how incredibly specific library funding is to community context and issues, and you'll get a lot of useful insights out of that one. The article on WebJunction called Common Public Library Funding Myths is also extremely insightful. These are great replies to the typical misconception you'll hear floating around in your conversations about public libraries. Those have definitely come in handy for a number of us at a number of different times, and I hope you enjoy it. And we've got a great piece from Library Journal about the way COVID-19 pandemic impacted public library funding. That's a really interesting article with John, the director of Every Library, the only PAC lobbying organization that advocates for libraries in local, state, and federal government. He noted that back in 2020, that actually during that year, public support for libraries was very high, and also that was also outside of the norm. Various kinds of state and federal aid relief really helps keep libraries afloat in many communities. But he warns that kind of relief was never meant to last forever, and libraries absolutely need to think about what comes next. And this is a great quote that I'm going to read verbatim. If a library has not been properly positioned to demonstrate its value, not just talk about how great they are, but actually measure their outcomes, they're going to have a hell of a time in an austerity budget. That, I think, is where he helps to connect the issues of advocacy and funding that we are going to talk about this week. I just also wanted to share a story from the previous professor of this course about her experiences with advocacy and funding and how they link, because it is an extremely relevant example. When she first began working in libraries in 2009 as a library assistant or a clerk, the library had just elected a new governor. in New Jersey whose platform was to reduce spending on government services. One of the ways he decided to do that was to majorly reduce funding to public libraries and other public services. They weren't the only public service that was defunded. So, for example, schools were as well. But they were singled out for the first time in many years as an area of reduction. And even though state funding didn't account for much, it's still reliable funding, and losing any amount of funding is a huge blow for any public library, as many of you are sure or aware. So for her first year working in libraries was actually a really difficult one for her. The director had to lay off a significant number of staff. They slashed the hours of operation. They got rid of Friday evening hours and started closing seasonally on Sundays. So staff did a lot of campaigning in the building and out in the community, at the reference desk, at programs, during outreach events, just to get the word out, because a lot of people didn't even realize what was happening to the library. There was a lot of focus on all the other cuts that were taking place, and the staff was trying to spread awareness. They would ask people to write to their local officials to help restore funding or stop further cuts. She was fresh out of undergrad, and it was one of the first times she really got involved in the on-the-ground political action and activism like that. And it was a very memorable experience for her. And fortunately, it did actually help. And that kind of activism was happening and taking places in a lot of communities in New Jersey and many other states as well. She did go on to say that she felt the impact of it at that time. A few big changes did eventually stick. So they did not reopen for Friday nights, and they're still closed on Sundays, except for certain parts of the year. They haven't created new staff positions for the library in a long time, but their collections budget did not suffer in a noticeable way. They had a lot of people donate to their friends' library group in order to help keep programming and funding going. And it also created a lot of awareness amongst the patrons about how very fine a line the library walks when it comes to funding, and how precarious things can be for many libraries. Out of this experience, she would think that it brought the community and the library together, and it resulted in partnerships between schools, the library, local businesses, the mayor's office, and the mayor's office is also more now involved in advocacy for the library as well. So the advocacy efforts of the staff seemed to help, not only turning around the deep cuts they were facing, but also in a lot of ways that staff did not anticipate. So from my experience, I know that Queens Public Library was facing approximately a $15 million budget cut this year from the city. However, through advocacy, they were able to ward off that budget cut that would have been extremely impactful for services. So as libraries talk about their contingency plans, right? Because they know that these cuts may happen, because you get that warning, right? So everybody starts working on what the contingency plan is. So they would cut Saturday and Sunday service, and then they would cut from the collections budget. For the most part, libraries will work really, really hard to prevent staff layoffs, especially at larger systems. And I know at Enoch Pratt, we look at hiring freezes, so meaning any vacancies that we have, we generally don't move forward with trying to fill them. And we also cut from the collection budget, because the collection budget is largely state and federally funded. So if we have to make any major impactful cuts, we can cut a significant part of the city funded part of that collection budget and reallocate it. Right now, our budget for Enoch Pratt is still in the air. I know that we did request additional funds for major infrastructure repairs, some of which were denied, but they will ask again next year. And it's really important that as library staff, you become aware of any upcoming legislation that will affect not only your funding but also policy, especially with everything that is happening in response to our current political climate. Let's move on to actionable items for this week. We're back to the discussion posts, and this week we'll share a bit about what, if anything, you might have known or assumed about public library funding prior to taking this class. And it's okay if you didn't know anything about public library funding, and what new insights you gained from this week's learning resources. I've also, I'm gonna link the actual documents along with these notes, because I know sometimes you guys hit the paywalls and stuff, so I'm gonna copy actual documents of the various texts that I think will generate a paywall for you. For the second prompt, imagine yourself working for a library that has received some kind of exciting grant, or maybe a big library bond act just passed the vote in your community, and your funding is just through the roof now, right? Can you imagine? What do you do when you have too much money? Imagine you're on a task force for spending this money, and think about what kinds of things you'd recommend focusing on first and why. And then you'll do a kind of blue sky proposal where you can imagine what library service could be with not just adequate but abundant funding. Try not to overthink it. Just let everyone know what kind of service and initiatives you would love to see at the local library if there were no limits. So that's it for today's lecture. I did try to keep it short to be cognizant of your time. And I hope that you enjoy week 6, and I'll see you all in the discussion board. Bye, everyone.